Learning by doing. Some have called it the oldest idea in education. For colleges and universities, this idea usually falls under the umbrella of experiential learning. That, of course, can include work-based learning like internships, can include study abroad, service learning programs, undergraduate research, and more. Today, we're going to talk about how to expand those opportunities for students, making sure those programs can be accessible to all and the benefits provided equally. I'm Ian Wilhelm, an editor with the Chronicle, and I'll be your moderator for this session. Thank you all very much for joining today. Got three great speakers who are going to join me, and I look forward to hearing from them. I'll also look forward to hearing from all of you in the audience. I'm actually going to start a poll now. And if you don't mind, please help me out to get a sense of who you are and what you're interested in learning about. So please answer this as best you can. I'm asking basically to give you a description of where your interest lies and also a sense of where you may be working within your organization. That'll help me sort of guide the conversation for what is a fairly big topic today and help me sort of guide some of those thoughts. But also make sure you ask your questions in the Q&A box as well. I'll be looking at those questions, trying to fold them in to the second half of today's conversation. I also hope that you'll encourage you to offer your own advice. What's your own experience there at your institution when it comes to working in experiential education programs? Please feel free to offer advice, answer other people's questions there, and connect as well. Each of those can be provided within the Q&A box too. I do want to thank the sponsor for today, and that's the Illinois Institute of Technology. I really appreciate their support for this discussion. And about halfway through today's session, I'm going to invite Brock Read, the editor of the Chronicle, to join. Brock's going to interview Raj Echambadi, the president of Illinois Tech, and then we'll return to the panel discussion afterwards. Now, without further ado, let me introduce the panel in alphabetical order by last name. First is Brenda James, who's the director for the Center for Academic Success and Achievement at Morgan State University. Next is Patrice Ludwig, the interim assistant vice president in research, economic development, and innovation at James Madison University. And then Andrew Potter, director of the Office of University Experiential Learning at the University of Georgia. Thank you all very much for joining our conversation today. And I'll remind Brenda, if you don't mind coming on screen, thanks very much. So obviously, we've been talking about this topic. It's one that has lots of different aspects to it. So I kind of want to level set a little bit and make sure people know where you're coming from within your institution. And Andrew, I was going to start with you because we talked about this about 2016, and correct me if I'm wrong, the university really put a bigger emphasis on this, and you came in a few years later to really expand the experiential education opportunities for its students. Could you talk a little bit about that and what you've done since that time that emphasis started?
Sure, Ian, thank you. Yeah, so the University of Georgia, for those who don't know, we are an R1 state flagship. We have roughly about 32,000 undergrads. And beginning with the incoming freshman class of 2016, the University of Georgia committed to making experiential learning a graduation requirement for every student. And so when you think about the opportunities, the challenges that poses in terms of ensuring that 32,000 students can complete and an experiential learning graduation requirement, a lot of the stuff that we had to do becomes very important. I mentioned to Ian when we chatted that, when I joined UGA in the winter of 2019, the office, we still felt very much like a startup. We were running hard, we were running fast, but we really had to start scaling quickly. And so since the initiative began, we've approved about 3,000 experiences now on campus that we manage, which are approved for experiential learning. They include everything, as Ian shared, internships to study abroad, to undergraduate research, service learning. We have some leadership programs, and then we also have some creative programs as well. So we're really focused on making sure we maintain those. They all have to be reviewed through our university curriculum committee. So there's faculty review on all these pieces. It's not just something that my office can necessarily build, but all of the colleges collaborate with us on this. And so that's kind of where we're at today, Ian.
No, I appreciate that, Andrew. I'm just taking a note here. Talk about that collaboration, how you work with those other parts of your institution, because as you said, you can't do it alone. And I think that might be a little bit of a theme to come up with different parts of this, because it all takes a lot of work. One office and certainly one part of the institution can't do it by itself. So thanks, Andrew. I appreciate that. Brenda, I'm going to come to you here and ask you a little bit about where you all are at Morgan State. And if I remember correctly, Lumina provided you all a grant, as well as some other historically Black universities and colleges, to expand opportunities within specifically the second year for second year students, not just in the second year, but for second year students generally. Can you talk a little bit about where you put your focus there and a little bit about that grant and what you've done with that?
Okay, so we actually started this in 2018 with a grant from Lumina. And as you said, targeted specifically to second year students. So ours is a second year experience program. It's a little different than perhaps other institutions in that it is, we're the office that manages that particular program. And so we're the Center for Academic Success and Achievement, which is actually an academic support unit within the Division of Enrollment Management and Student Services. And so one of the things that we did is to look at the second year students, because we have a lot of emphasis on our first year students, but then what do we do those students in their second year that really helps them to stay engaged and participate in the university community, particularly post-COVID. So one of the things that we did with our second year experience program is that includes all returning first year students. It is not mandatory. It's totally voluntary unless it's part of a course. And so in order to help expand that program, one of the things that I'm doing for the past 2 years is actually offer faculty mini grants so that we have encouraged faculty to include an experiential learning program within their course. But also we got a grant from JP Morgan Chase several years ago, which also provides us incentives, things that we can do to incentivize our students, such as offering scholarships and stipends for particular activities.
I appreciate that, Brendan, mentioning the other work that you do there. I definitely want to follow up on a couple of the ideas, but I want to bring Patrice in here as well. Patrice, I'm looking at the poll results. We've got a good portion here who are faculty members. And I noticed that the first person on in our Q&A, Kathleen, says she's a faculty member interested in learning how to apply experiential learning specifically to math and statistics in a college setting. So Patrice, I want to start with you. I know you're administrator, but I want to put your faculty hat back on. You have a background in biology, and talk about how, well, you described it, you kind of backed into this idea of experiential learning, this sort of concept, if you will, of experiential learning, even though it's, as I mentioned before, it's sort of an old concept, everyone kind of gets it, but how did you come to it specifically as a faculty member at James Madison?
Yeah, thank you. I'm so thrilled to be here. And as a faculty member, I kept asking for more, like how do I know that the students are getting what they're supposed to be getting out of it? I come from a biology background, so we learn by doing. I think that's a lot of people learn by doing. It just didn't seem like quite enough. And there wasn't quite enough there. And then I also was starting to realize that I kind of the same thing about this collaboration, that I kept asking questions that I couldn't answer in my own discipline. And so I needed to keep going outside of the discipline and bring faculty members and students into these questions that we could answer together. So I literally backed into it to say, oh, we're having these experiences, but we're all across these different disciplines, and it's not really fair for me to evaluate my biology students on their engineering knowledge relative to the engineers and their engineering knowledge. So how do we do that? And we landed on reflection, which is part of this whole experiential learning cycle. And so I was literally backing into this. And then this whole world opened up of like, oh, this is really big. And I am not doing this alone, which was like super exciting.
Yeah, Patrice, I appreciate that. And I imagine many faculty members kind of, oh, we discovered there's actually a term for this, and there's a whole line of thinking for this. And there's a lot of documentation, a lot of study to do that has to do with what the benefits can be for students. And I want to kind of dive into that because we certainly have, I think that looking at the proportions here, the largest number, 46% of the people in the audience were asking, how do you increase the number of students enrolled in experiential education programs? So, Andrew, I'm going to come back to you and ask you not just about how you increase the number, obviously making a requirement will do a lot of that for you, but why was the institution so focused on this? What were you hoping to get out of it? What were you looking? What was the institution? I realize you weren't there when they started this, but what has the institution said about why it was an important area to do more on?
Yeah, so when you look at the task force that launched this initiative at the University of Georgia, there were basically 3 primary goals. Goal 1 is they wanted to take the excellence in UGA's classroom and have students apply that learning ideally outside of the classroom. So that was goal 1. Goal 2 was tied into competency and skill-based development. So aligning what they're learning in the classroom with emerging workforce skills, et cetera, et cetera. And then thirdly was broadening perspectives. We certainly think of this when you go to an internship, you realize you might find an entirely new pathway you not thought about before. You go study abroad in a foreign country, you get an entirely new perspective about what the world is like. So those are kind of the three primary goals. The second thing that we really focused on from an expansion standpoint. So you're right, Ian, when you make it a graduation requirement, you can grow the pie very quickly. But that doesn't mean that everyone has access to every type of opportunity. And one of the big things, and this was led by the office of the president, Jerry Moorhead, has been extremely supportive of this initiative at the University of Georgia. But they established a experiential learning scholarship fund. And so to date, we've awarded about $2.6 million in both merit and need-based aid to help students afford the types of experiences that they want to do. And so there's been, I think, even in the 4 years since I've been at the university, a more aggressive commitment to this fund building, creating more and more endowed funds so that we have sustainability when we think about, especially as the cost of study abroad, for example, is going higher and higher and higher. How do we make sure that we can give students these opportunities in the future? So that fund building has been a really key part of our strategy as well.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Andrew, that description of it. And Brenda, you all also have as you mentioned, the other grant. I mentioned Lumina before. You mentioned the JP Morgan. Could you talk, again, that you all received? Can you talk a little bit more about that? Where did you funnel that money? You mentioned scholarships and other incentives. What did you do with that money to kind of help you expand the program? Again, I realize the opportunity you're providing is voluntary, but you still want to make sure those incentives are there, obviously. And of course, to Andrew's point, not everyone can necessarily access some of these programs because it can be potentially expensive depending on the type of program. They may cost a little bit more for the student. So how do you kind of do that and make sure you have those incentives and those scholarships in place?
So one of the things we do is we offer, as I mentioned, faculty mini grants. Those are $5,000. And so all we're asking faculty to do is integrate an experiential learning opportunity within a course that already exists. So you're not doing anything new. It's just if you had an opportunity and you had $5,000 to do something, really get students involved and engage in that opportunity, what would that be? The other thing is we offer scholarships too for those students who have engaged in an experiential learning opportunity. We ask them to complete an experiential learning plan. And then they have the ability, if they've completed an opportunity, to apply for the scholarship at the end of the semester. We offer scholarships each semester, and we offer them in the highest GPA, the most improved GPA, leadership, and community service. So that is one of the ways we get students engaged. The other thing is for students who are involved in different opportunities. They get a t-shirt, they get a backpack. So some Morgan gear, SYE gear, which incentivizes, we do a lot of tabling events just to make students aware. And then for study abroad, those students who want to study abroad, we also do offer stipends to those students to help them with the financial part of being able to go abroad and do something. And so those have worked really quite well. And that's one of the reasons JP Morgan offered us the grant, is so that we did have some opportunities and things we could do to incentivize students. Since it is voluntary, they don't have to apply.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Brenda. And I also do want to talk about sort of how you incentivize faculty, which you've touched upon as well. But before we get into that, Patrice, I was going to ask you a little bit about how you all are thinking about working with students and trying to make sure that they're taking advantage of these opportunities, or how they understand these opportunities. As I understand it, they are, again, voluntary, some of the work, the courses. And so how do you kind of make them understand these things are really valuable, potentially to your education, but maybe even longer term to your career, wherever that may be?
Yeah, honestly, some word of mouth. Okay, so I will preface by saying that yes, we have those kinds of opportunities on campus. I am aware of them. They're not exactly in my portfolio. I'm coming from this in a space on campus that's called X Labs, and it's a cross-disciplinary, kind of disciplinary agnostic space that lives in research, economic development, and innovation, but it's open to all students across campus. So that changes things a little bit. And they're coming into courses that are problem focused or project focused, but more problem focused. So their experience ends up being transformational, that they tell us. We're not, like they're offering this to us as a course-based situation that they are coming into. And I can totally, and then we're easing into the kind of work-based learning experience space by hosting a prep class for a cohort of students that's going to go on as a cohort into a major company and do their internship, paid internship together. So, we're experimenting with how to start with courses and then move, because that's our bread and butter. So that transformational space, we know about it because reflection is mandatory. And it sounds like across the board, their students are thinking about how they're making of these experiences, whatever they might be, and then being able to report that back to potential employers, next career moves, or other instructors. Does that kind of answer your question?
It does, Patrice. Yeah, in terms of the X Labs, I'd say, like, I think the best descriptions I read in an article was sort of a blue collar design school or
Yeah.
D school. That's from a quote from an article. I'd say it's in our chat already, that my colleague Beth McMurtry wrote a good profile of what they're trying to do in the X Lab. So if you want to learn more about it, you can grab that article there. We're going to be sending that article to all of you in an email as well if you want to have further understanding of it. But Patrice, let me stay with you for a second, because you've mentioned the reflection and how important that is. And I've heard that elsewhere about experiential learning in general. I mean, some ways it can be applied to all educational opportunities in some sense, but how important that reflection moment is for a student in processing what they've learned. I've heard this specifically, as we talked about, in the context of study abroad, where simply coming back from a cross-cultural experience can then say, oh, well, here's what I actually learned. Here's what I actually did. Here's where I actually learned some of the communication skills when I was struggling, for example, to figure out how to set up a bank account, or how to draw down money, or to figure out how to communicate with someone who didn't speak my language. So again, that reflection seems really key to understanding those educational opportunities and moments you may have had while you were overseas, specific type of program. But for you, why is the reflection important? Why is that key to making sure the experiential education kind of perhaps has that ability to really offer some benefits to students?
I think it goes back to students having the opportunity to be metacognitive. I mean, think about our experience in school. How often were we asked to think about our thinking? And so we developed it. Like, we didn't get here for nothing, right? So we learned how to think about our thinking, but in the pressures, I would say pressures of our students today, they're not even really thinking about what they're learning. They're thinking about how to get to the next step. And so really taking a moment to say, how has my confidence evolved in this space? We use something called the learning record, which has dimensions of learning. And the students are making observations during the week of moments that they're paying attention to, like, oh, that's new to me. Oh, I'm recognizing that I'm thinking differently. Oh, here's an artifact that shows how I've changed my, my behavior in some way. So I really think demanding the space for students to think about what they're doing. I want those students in my life. I want them as my graduate students. I want them as my colleagues. I want them, surrounding me for the rest of my life. So just that reflection piece means that they're able to articulate, honestly, something that's kind of expensive, right? Like, you're fundraising, Andrew, and this is not a cheap endeavor. Like, we're trying to fund this kind of work. How do we make sure that everybody understands the value of it? Well, the students have to articulate that. How are they going to articulate that? They're going to have to think about what they're doing and reflect on that.
Appreciate that, Patrice. Andrew, I want to bring you back in that sense. I mean, it's been a number of years since the university started making a requirement. There's a big generalization. How do students feel about it? I mean, do you feel like your office or others have to kind of articulate why it's an important part of their education, what their benefits are? Obviously, you can't. It's a giant stereotype to say one or the other, but just kind of curious how you kind of talk to students about it. What are they most interested in learning about, or what are they also most interested in? What questions do they ask about potentially why they have to do this?
Yeah, I think the vast majority of the students, I'd say, are really excited about the opportunities that they have. They're excited about the funding support. There are some students, and I have met some of those students, who see it as another box that they need to check to graduate, right? And I think there's probably no way you're going to get around that. But we've had such a great working relationship with our 15 or so colleges on campus, with faculty, associate deans, et cetera, that I think we've reached that tipping point now where experiential learning is just part of the UGA experience. And I don't have data that says students come to UGA excited about the experiential learning. But we're seeing in some of the small scale challenges that I do in even some of my courses, they're actually asking for more of it. And so we've now started tracking the percent of our graduates who get the ability to complete at least 2 or more. And our goal is I think it's within 2 more years, we'll be at about 74%. So right now we're hovering in the mid 60s. So it's definitely something the students are intrigued about. They like the skill-based connection. They like the pathway exploration. And for some of them, this becomes one of the life-changing moments that they think about. As we've been building some of the, for lack of a better term, the marketing assets about the program. A lot of students will say, hey, what I remember from my college experience was that internship I had with Deloitte in Chicago, or I went to Costa Rica on my study abroad program, or I remember building that Formula One race car in the UJ Motorsports Lab. So, they become these kind of almost like cornerstone pieces that define what they do. And I think that's what gets me really excited about what's going on.
I appreciate that, Andrew. Brenda, again, but coming back to your program, I realize it's voluntary. People are going to be stepping forward. But how do you talk to the students about how do they make sure that they know about it in the first place? And then, of course, know that the opportunities perhaps for a scholarship if they need one. And just in general, thinking about, hey, here's how we connect this to your education more broadly.
So we're on social media, obviously, and we also do tabling events. The other thing that we do is we actually introduce it in the first year. Because at the end of each semester, our academic advisors who work specifically with first-year students really make them aware. Career awareness is a part of their freshman orientation course. So to make them aware of opportunities and experiences that they can have just in terms of career awareness, career readiness, maybe majors that they are interested in, but really haven't ever had an opportunity to talk to anyone who does that or really know very much about it. So one of the other thing is that just using students to share their stories, because students who've actually had the opportunity or who have gotten the scholarship, I mean, it's word of mouth, but it's also my advisors are SYE coaches. So they are working with students regularly on a regular basis to inform them of different opportunities that exist. And I think probably one of the most popular things that we do, since it is all second year students, not specific to number of credits or GPA or anything, is we offer campus to career field trips, and everybody hears about those. And so when they're able to go to a company or organization, we took a trip, and when Patrice was talking about, biology, our biology majors went to the Patuxent Environmental and Aquatic Research Lab, and they actually went out into the bay in a boat, and they actually pulled in oysters and actually got to eat raw oysters. And so when students have those kinds of experiences, then that word spreads, and it really intrigues them to think, oh, wow, I'd like to do that. So, a variety of means, but mostly social media, word of mouth. My SYE coaches, informing their students, sending out information. We get opportunities from a variety of sources on campus. Our Career Development Center is excellent, but also just working with faculty and in their courses, students actually taking the course and being able to. So for example, professional business course where the instructor professor takes students to a 5-star hotel and they dine. So when students hear about those kinds of opportunities, where they're able to connect their classroom experiences to a real life opportunity to get to do something outside of the classroom. That's been our biggest incentive. And in addition to having, the scholarships and things that JP Morgan has provided for us.
No, and that makes a lot of sense in terms of the word of mouth being key to it all as well. I might skip the raw oysters if you don't mind, Brenda, if I were to go on that trip. That's just one thing I might have to pass on. I did want to ask you just quickly, because I want to pause here in a second for our segment with Illinois Tech. But in terms of the experiential learning plan that you ask students to fill out, what are kind of the aspects you ask them to kind of articulate? I realize we don't, in terms of receiving some of that scholarship money, I'm just kind of curious. I think some folks are curious in the audience as well.
Also, one of the most important parts is the reflection. But we ask them, we want to know what are their majors, where was their experience, what did they do? There are certain, it's like a drop-down menu where they say, okay, based on this experience, these are the things that I learned, these are the skills that I developed. But the most important part of it is having them to reflect on what that experience was like, and then how do they apply it to what they're doing in the course, in the classroom, and actually what are their goals in terms of what do they hope to learn from the experience before they even have it. But we've gotten some of our best information from students just based on the reflections. And in many instances, it really is, a life-altering, changing, aha, awakening moment for them. And that's what we're looking for.
Appreciate that, Brenda. As I mentioned, I'm going to pause in a second for our segment with Illinois Tech. But first, I wanted to ask all the audience another question here. So I'm launching another poll here, basically asking you, how well does your institution do a good job of offering experiential education opportunities to all students? Just kind of get a sense of where folks are thinking how well their institution does in that. Please answer the poll, and if you can, tell me in the Q&A why you answered the way you did. I'll be reading those responses during our break, and I'll bring more of those conversation, more of the Q&A, more of the questions into the second half of this conversation. Thanks to everybody who's been in the Q&A already. It's already been quite robust in that conversation. Now I'm going to remind my panelists to turn off their video and go on mute for a few minutes. And I'm going to invite Brock Read, the editor of the Chronicle, to join. Brock?
Ian, thank you. Hi, I'm Brock Read. I'm the editor of the Chronicle of Higher Education. And unlike Ian, I'm pro raw oyster. That said, I want to thank Ian and all the panelists for a great discussion so far. I want to thank all of you for attending and bringing your questions. And I want to thank the Illinois Institute of Technology for making this event possible. I'm very glad to be speaking today with Raj Echambadi. Raj is the president of Illinois Tech since taking on that role in 2021. One of his main focuses has been making experiential learning a cornerstone of the university's broader mission to foster economic mobility. So he's a perfect guest for us to have here today. And Raj, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Brock. Thank you for this opportunity.
Now, Raj, I wanted to start by going directly at your mission and how experiential learning connects to that. So as I mentioned, Illinois Tech is very driven to serve Pell-eligible students and to promote social mobility. I assume that creates a somewhat different context for experiential learning than some other institutions might have. So I wanted to ask, how do you define experiential learning at Illinois Tech, given the students you serve?
Thank you, Brock. Great question. Before I get into the specifics of experiential learning at Illinois Tech, let me briefly outline our origin story. We were founded in 1890. We are a private university. We were founded in 1890 on a very noble vision to educate students from all walks of life, because the fear then was leaving behind the children of the Chicago's meatpackers, steel workers, and machinists, and not integrate them properly into the industrial society. And we were born to become a technological university so that we can actually help these children adapt into the mainstream. And for over 130 years, we have done that, Brock. One of the heartwarming things for me was last year, Bloomberg Philanthropies named us as one of the high-flying institutions in the country, one of 28 in the country, for our college access. Over a third of our students are Pell eligible. And our college success rates, 92% employment rate 6 months after graduation. For this simultaneous access and success, we have gotten a lot of external validation over the last few years. But this started off beyond the technological education we provide. Experiential learning has been in our DNA, if you will. In the mid-1990s, we created a program, and we were one of the first universities then to actually incorporate academic credit for experiential learning. So we have our undergraduates, even to this day, they have to do 2 4-credit courses. We call it the interprofessional projects, iPro, as part of their graduation requirement. iPro is multidisciplinary. It brings together multiple disciplines, works on a very relevant problem so that we merge the rigor of the classroom with the relevance of the real world. Based on our own experiences and on research, especially given the unique composition of the students that we attract, we decided to pivot to a new identity called Elevate, which brings together all the experiential learning opportunities we provide. And I'll be more than happy to talk in the specifics. But think of it as modeling the ethos. Resumes are built, they are not written. So we want our students to build their resumes, and Elevate is the scaffold that brings together all these opportunities so that it expands the opportunities for our students. And I'll close with this, Brock. When you are at a university with over a third Pell recipients, the capabilities you need to build and the networks you need to provide are very different when you're at a university with 5% Pell, because a lot of these students have the capabilities, they know the know-how, they have the family connections, if you will, to help them, the networks, if you will, to help them. When you don't have that, colleges and universities have to build that scaffold, and which is what our Elevate is all about.
So Raj, let's get into a little bit of specifics in terms of what what types of experiential learning have proved to be most valuable, most reachable for a group of students, who include many who are adults, many who are first generation, many who are lower income.
Perfect. And for us, one of the things that I want to highlight is Elevate is not a one-size-fits-all program. There is a student who wants to do a PhD, and that student can go in a different direction, do research right through. Or a student who is interested in doing a corporate job can do internships, can do study away in a foreign city, and then work at an employer. But that is part of the equation. One of the things that we have tried to do, Brock, is not to have silos of, okay, here is the classroom education, here is the experiential learning. We bring it together. And experiential learning can take a lot of forms. Experiential learning can be beyond what I said, research opportunities, co-ops, internships. It could be student on-campus jobs, student leadership in government, if you will. And one of the very interesting things we have done is to engage the corporate partners in a variety of ways. A lot of times we go to the corporate partners and say, hey, can you provide an internship opportunity? But we also work with the corporate partners to enhance our curriculum, to say, what are the skills you need so that we can build it in our syllabus? We have also started something called career pathway courses, where we have reformatted our existing academic curriculum to include industry certification, like an Amazon Web Services certificate or a Salesforce certificate, etc. It is never a one-size-fits-all. And one very interesting thing, Brock, and this is for the benefit of the audience, ever since we launched Elevate and we brought Elevate all the opportunities together, we have seen our numbers go up in terms of recruitment, in terms of the interest from students, but also the student outcomes in terms of jobs has actually gone up in terms of salaries and so on, which obviously benefits our students and families. And one last thing I will say, Brock, when you think about Elevate, for us, it is a comprehensive access to on-the-job experiences, to personalized mentorship and job readiness, so our students can go on and be successful. And for that to happen, we have commissioned an ecosystem. So every student has a career coach, academic advising, peer/alumni mentors, all melded together so that we can help them.
Raj, I wanted to circle back to the point that you made earlier about how different the sort of support structure and the institutional commitment has to be if you have, upwards of 1/3 students on Pell Grants versus 5% students on Pell Grants. We've all heard that for disadvantaged students or adult students or first generation students, right, they may be less likely to pursue service learning or study away or be aware of those options. What do you have to do from a kind of advising or connective tissue standpoint to, right, to sort of explain and make these opportunities available, across all of your student body?
Make a commitment as a university that experiential learning is fairly critical and start it from day one. You can't wait for a semester or two and say at the end of second semester, our students will go into an experiential learning. So an organizational commitment is fairly important from the top. And that actually brings people together, if you will, your academic faculty, your staff, your alumni, your donors, all of them together. But what this also does, Brock, is it builds a credible commitment for the student, so that the student says, okay, in order for me to be successful and my family to be successful, I need to participate in these kinds of opportunities so that I am better off in the long run. And last but not the least, I would say to you, beyond the connections, I told you it's an ecosystem play and so on, it is fundamentally build a community of support that, especially when we are dealing with students who are from economically disadvantaged students, they hesitate to ask questions. So how do you build a community of support so that these students can be honest about asking questions and they can get the answers back? Because a lot of times, one of my heartwarming things is these students are incredible. When you pair them up with the right kind of wraparound support, great things can happen. And that would be my advice to all of them who want to do this kind of work.
Well, Raj, thank you so much. There's much more I'd love to ask you, but I realize we've got to get this back to Ian and his panel. I'm eager to hear more from them and some of the feedback from the poll. But thanks again, Raj, for your time. Thanks again to the Illinois Institute of Technology for making this event possible. And Ian?
Thank you, Brock. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you both. I really appreciate your time. So I'm going to share the results here as I ask my panelists to come back on screen. And I apologize, I'm looking off screen at my big screen, but asking this poll question here. So most of you agree that your institution does a pretty good job in terms of offering experiential education to all students. We did have some feedback here from some folks. We have a person in the audience, Mary Lynn, who says, my school requires internship and experiential components, but programs in the arts get little institutional support. It's all on the faculty to provide in that case, but they do. So Mary Lynn's making the case that, hey, some more institutional support there for at least for those in the arts would be helpful. Amanda says, cost continues to be the biggest barrier preventing students from participating. So we've dug into that a little bit, but I want to kind of focus on that just a bit more, since we did have some clarification questions that I want to get into for the panel. And the first one goes to you, Andrew. This is from Kristen. And she asks, please expand on the UGA Scholarship Fund and how it is administered. For example, is the UGA Scholarship Fund a university-wide centralized fundraising effort? And if so, how do individual academic units contribute to that effort? And a little bit more detail there, Andrew, just on how you all raise those funds, how you distribute them. That would be helpful, I think, as the audience deals with this primary barrier of cost to the student.
Sure, great question. So my office, the Office of University Experiential Learning, we are technically a non-academic office, meaning we are not housed in a college. So we serve every student on campus, regardless of college, regardless of degree, regardless of major. So in that sense, all of the fundraising that we do and alongside our Office of Development, et cetera, it is available to all students. Now, each individual college is also raising their own funds as well. So there's a little bit of a decentralized nature going on campus, but the only thing in order to apply for funding, the student has to be participating in an approved experiential learning activity at UGA. We have two types of funds. So our merit-based fund currently awards students up to $3,000 to offset the cost of their experience. Our need-based funding can award up to 90% of the total cost of attendance in the program. So and some of those awards can be quite large. And we work closely with our Office of Student Financial Aid to actually score those students so that we can find the students who can most benefit from a significant amount of funding so that they can go spend a semester at our UGA at Oxford program or do a 3-week-long Maymester program in China or something like that. So that you have I guess the short answer is we are a university-wide unit, and we're basically dividing the funds into either it's a merit-based or a need-based fund. I hope that addresses the question.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I think there's just some details. I know there's some development officers on the call too. Very curious about how to raise more funds for this types of programs as they see how they're important too. So I appreciate any more details there as well. Brenda, I was going
Yeah,
to
and
ask
if
you a
I-
question. Oh, go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, if I can just add one more thing, I think
Please.
the one thing that I've been convinced of in the 4 years now that I've been at UGA is how important collaboration is on campus. Our UGA Foundation, for example, right now is involved in a matching funds campaign. So if a donor is willing to put up a minimum of $50,000 to create an endowed fund, they will currently match that. And so we've probably added, probably 10 to 15 funds in just the last year on a model like this. But again, just another player on campus who values this, sees the importance of this initiative, and is signing up to help carry the water. So that collaboration piece from the funding side is just so important.
Yeah, Andrew, I appreciate you mentioning it. Again, there's several folks who mentioned that they were from the Development and Advancement Office in the Q&A, and I appreciate making sure their perspective is shared here as well. As you mentioned about collaboration, I was thinking about faculty, I was thinking about department heads, I was thinking more of the academic side, but as you say, the financial part cannot be overlooked, and working with that advancement and development side, as well as making sure you find those donors who are interested in these experiences for students is important. Brenda, I was going to ask you, this is a clarification from an attendee. Her name is Heather. And she says, do the faculty mini grants cover the cost of the experiential education for the students, or is it a form of payment to the instructor, or both? I assumed it was for the instructor to kind of go off and make sure they had time and incentive to go support the program or develop a program.
So the $5,000 is actually based on what the instructor's doing in his or her course.
Gotcha.
So what happens is, let's say we have faculty who wanted to, I had a lot of applicants from the School of Architecture and Planning this semester. And so one of the places they wanted to take a field trip to Pennsylvania to a Frank Lloyd Wright designed house. And so it pays for the bus. They use it to buy, either box lunches or snacks for the students. So the funding is used to pay for whatever it is that they're doing for
Gotcha.
those students.
Thanks, Brenda. That clarifies it for me too, because I thought it was just for the professor, but in that sense, yes, making sure it's for the program itself. We've got this sort of dovetails with that a little bit, but we've got a comment here from Abby. I'm going to expand on it in a second, but I think she makes an interesting point. She says, I love to hear more about making experiential learning a requirement. We've had some pushback from faculty about forcing students, forcing in quotes here. I want to talk a little bit about the faculty role and how you may have to sort of work with faculty to expand these opportunities. Not saying any of your institutions have real big challenges around that, but any advice, and Patrice, I'm going to come to you. I've sort of picking on you as the faculty perspective in some sense, but just how do you make sure faculty work? Because it does take, just to be clear here, part of the reason I'm asking is because it can take more work. Maybe I shouldn't overemphasize that, but it can take a lot more work. And this is a time when faculty are feeling a lot of stuff going on. They've been through COVID, they've been through a lot of other stuff. Their institutions continue to change. Anyway, with all that caveat, just kind of thinking, how do you think about incentivizing faculty, making sure they understand aware of both the challenges and the benefits of these types of programs if they're going to add them?
Yeah, that's really hard. For all the reasons that you just said, it takes a lot of work. Okay, so I will caveat this by saying I'm doing this in the classroom, kind of that's where my space is, and it does take a lot. I think some of it's a little bit of identifying opportunity. So we've heard conversations about classes, groups taking field trips, right? So you might be doing that already, or it might be in your syllabus to have some of these activities. And with just a little tweak, you might be able to think about how that fits into an experiential learning lens. So it might just be a little bit of you might be doing it and it's just a mind shift, right? So some of that might be happening. In terms of incentives, I think all of us are in it because we want the students that we're interacting with to have their best possible next experience now and next phase. And so understanding how transformative it can be for students is important. But I would say, like, I might have pushback if somebody said, you need to figure out now how to incorporate field trips into all of your classes, or you need to figure out how to offer a short-term, study abroad. So I do think that there's a way that looking at what you're doing and seeing if it fits is one thing. And then having support. I think what Brenda said about like having supports for faculty to learn how to do this kind of stuff is really important, and the space to not get it right on the first try, right? So as we try things, like we should also be in that reflective mindset and thinking about what are we doing that's working, what are we doing that's not working. It's an experience for us as well. So yeah.
That's helpful, Patricia. And I appreciate your sort of point one, that I shouldn't overemphasize, hey, we're talking about like big giant programs that go abroad. No, it could be some small things to start off with, and to think about just that. And to your main point, and I should be careful about thinking of not mentioning that, hey, a lot of obviously the main motivation for many faculty when it comes to their courses is their students. And obviously once they know sort of the value of these programs, they're probably aware of them. As you said, they probably just need to learn a little bit how do I integrate it. It depends on the type of course, whether that integration makes sense, or ways of just thinking about it differently. Again, so perhaps more of a mind shift rather than something wholesale and a big change. Andrew, Brenda, I didn't know if either of you want to weigh in on this, on how you work with faculty. Again, I want to be careful here in suggesting that a lot of faculty are against this or pushing back against it, but there is sort of a grade. Faculty have a lot on their plates right now. I'm just curious if you feel like there's any way you talk about with them in terms of making sure they are thinking about this and looking for those opportunities. Again, I know we talked about the incentive. Brenda, obviously, Andrew, a requirement for all students. That's going to get more people thinking about it, as well as the faculty member. Just any thoughts in general about how, if another institution out there is wrestling with this challenge of trying to tell their faculty a little bit about how valuable these programs are to students.
Yeah, from the University of Georgia side, I'll mention two things. There are more things we're doing, but one is engagement college by college. So on the college level, we have an experiential learning certification officer who tends to be associate dean at the college. They become a key thought leader for us in engaging with the faculty. It helps us identify and offer training and professional development for faculty members who are thinking about this, wondering about this, et cetera. So that's the human side of it. There's a structural side too. So when the University of Georgia created this initiative and made it a graduation requirement, it allowed the colleges, and therefore the faculty in those colleges, to allow them to make decisions on the approved programs if they needed to be degree integrated or not. So while we work with the University Curriculum Committee to approve a program for experiential learning, individual faculty, curriculum committees, and individual colleges have the right not to recognize that for their students. So if you have a college who wants to purely have their students working on degree integrated experiences, internships that are connected to it, study abroad programs that are connected, et cetera, they still retain that authority to do that. And so I think that probably helped soften the blow maybe a little bit when the initiative was first launched. But I'd say by and large, I mean, we have a very great set of faculty at the University of Georgia that we enjoy working with.
I appreciate that, Andrew. Brenda, any thoughts on this? Thank you. Go ahead.
Sure. For us, well, when we first started this, we just had information sessions because we didn't want faculty to think this is something, in addition to what you're already doing, creating something new. And so one of the buy-ins is that it's a course you already have. So if you had an opportunity to have the resources to, integrate an experiential learning opportunity into that course, what it would be. And then once faculty started doing that and realized that, again, it's word of mouth, telling other, their colleagues, oh, we were able to do this. And then we do have some interdisciplinary faculty who have worked together to do experiential learning activities with their students. And then the other thing is we have each semester a 50 by 25 meeting gathering of faculty and administrators. And so one of the things that our vice president of our division asked is that faculty actually present what actually they did for their experiential learning opportunity, and then actually had students be on the program and talk about, how it benefited them. So as the semesters go on and more people, I think, or more faculty are engaged, and they talk to other faculty and they realize, oh, okay, I can do that. We can do that. Because as I said, a field trip, other than planning where you want to go, all they have to do is plan where they want to go, give me the receipts. I send it to the, foundation office. So as I said, that has been probably one of the most popular. but there are things that faculty have come up with to do. And again, having the resources to it, but also getting recognition for it and seeing how it benefits their students. It's growing.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Brenda. Again, some of that word of mouth is probably, just like for students, is probably really important here. We've got a question here from Joel, and he's asking about technology. And I admit this is something that you all three of us in our previous calls, we didn't really touch upon this. So just the caveat this, but Joel asks, I'd like to know how technology is used to augment experiential learning opportunities through enhancing the experience, increasing exploration, or even creating new opportunities that may eliminate barriers like travel. I've certainly heard within, again, the area I probably know best is study abroad. Certainly some folks saying, well, study abroad is a challenge for a lot of reasons, cost being one of them, time being another, even if it's a short trip. Some folks have done things like exchanges with classes around the world, potentially virtually, certainly referred to the growth of virtual internships. So I feel like that's died down since the pandemic. Just kind of a broad question for the three of you. Again, I know this may not be a focus for you all, but the thoughts of how technology may enhance some of these opportunities for perhaps not supplanting them, but maybe, again, adding to them, complementing them in some way. I'm going to see if any of you want to raise a hand on this one and talk about it. Go ahead, Andrew. Thank you.
Yeah, Ian, that's a great question. We have existing technology in campus that we use to, of course, manage and administer the program. But the main thing that I want to talk about is we began a process about 2 years ago to take the next step of providing students with a comprehensive learner record. So when students at UGA graduate, they'll have both a transcript of the courses they completed and then a comprehensive learner record, which will index. And we're going to start initially with a lot of the experiential learning, the active learning things on campus that will index to competencies. So we had to put competencies through an approval process with our university curriculum committee. That's now been approved. And now we're on the back end process. And so folded in that, I think I saw a comment in there too at some point about e-portfolios.
Right.
The enterprise system we acquired that's got a e-portfolio component. So there's a lot of building. And this isn't just like a LinkedIn building exercise. Where I really see this going long term, especially because we're in this transition where the economy, and Harvard Business Review will tell you, started in 2008. We are moving away from degree discipline-based hiring to skill-based hiring. And I spent my entire career in industry. I completely agree with that. And so what we really hope this will do long term is students will be able to identify as a freshman, all right, here are the certain skills which I really need to quote unquote master. And it will help identify on a skill level what they can do, right? Are there certain experiences? Are there certain courses, et cetera, et cetera? And it almost becomes a guide for them through the process. And then it helps them articulate on the back end as well. I did this thing. This gets back to Patrice's comment about reflection. I mean, that's the key, you know? So I think that's kind of the biggest kind of tech move we're making right now at the University of Georgia.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Andrew, because you're drawing together some dots that we've seen certainly here at the Chronicle about this and connecting experiential education to or this move of, again, back to reflection, a little bit of articulating the skills you're learning in different forms in your classroom, but then also being able to carry those over and articulate them to an employer and to others and carry them through your education potentially. I know Morgan State's exploring this as well with a sort of an e-portfolio as well, and it's becoming more of a part of a conversation in many ways. And these experiential education opportunities seem really key to being able to articulate them well and put them on not just your resume, hey, I just did this thing, but here's what I actually learned. Here's kind of where I can show those competencies as well. I'm going to move on unless anyone else wants to kind of jump into that technology aspect again. But I did have oh, Brenda, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to share it just from a different perspective. Please. In terms of technology, and I'll have to email this to you because I can't remember the name of the group. But the experiential learning opportunities was for our students to connect with students around the world. The group had actually specific topics that students would talk about and share and interact with. And so that was one of the activities that we used with our students. Probably the hardest part is the time change, the times.
Right.
And so it was only specific times when, you know, our students could engage, but to have the opportunity to be able to talk with students from around the world about specific topics and engage with them, I mean, it was a phenomenal experience, and you know, certainly less expensive than students trying to travel to, you know, do a study abroad activity or something like that. So yeah, that was phenomenal.
setting up virtual meetings and navigating different time zones is a lot of my work too. So it's something that's actually a practical skill, I would argue.
It is.
Yeah. We've got about 5 more minutes here, and I want to kind of wrap things up for all of you to give you a chance to kind of offer some final thoughts, some key takeaways. And I'll do this in the umbrella of a great question that an attendee named Debbie asks. And she asks, in your opinions, in addition to reflection, what other 2 or 3 things must be included in experiential learning to make it high impact? So she's putting high impact in there. That's a set of practices when teaching that have been shown and documented to be really beneficial to a student in their learning and potentially in their career. And I think Debbie kind of asked a great way of thinking about it. What is it that really makes these, what do you all recommend that makes these programs really stand out? What makes them really effective in that? And Patrice, I also want to get to your point too. I'll come to you first, but you also mentioned this comment here from Amanda about watered down potential. So I think there's something tied there. So you can talk about that too, please.
Sure. So I think the question, the comment and the question gets to the idea of how we all think about experiential learning. And I think we each said something quite different, and how we interpret that very large umbrella. And I know there's people working on kind of a definition of what that is, but I would say like being aware of our lens is really important when we're having these kinds of discussions, like where are we coming from? And you've done a really nice job of letting us articulate our lens. So I appreciate that very much. And then in terms of like what has to be included, my big thing is like a real challenge. You have to know thyself in these spaces. So giving students the opportunity to really get to know themselves and then to be challenged in a way that they might not have expected, but also the scaffolding to support them when they're experiencing that challenge and how to deal with that. So that's my 2 cents on what else would need to be included.
No, Patrice, I really appreciate it. Thanks for your time today.
I would mention 2 things from my end, Ian, that I think are really, really important. One, from the infrastructure side, collaboration is key. I know I'm at a large R1 institution, but I think it would apply no matter what size your institution is. The more people on campus that you can get rowing the canoe with you, and then even your off-campus stakeholders, your corporate partners, and we've seen a massive growth in project-based learning. I think that collaboration piece, it pays off in the long run with the students. And then the second is just quality of design. One of the benefits that I had coming into the University of Georgia is the University Curriculum Committee had done a very deep dive job on working to define what is experiential learning at UGA. We have a very detailed rubric. Those of you who want to look at the rubric and how we score and decide what's experiential learning, you can go to our website, el.uga.edu, and you can find the rubric there. And then I also think finding like-minded groups, and I serve on the board of the Society for Experiential Ed, but it's a great group of thought leaders, especially for somebody me coming from industry, finding folks to connect with and think about, how do we really do this and do it well? And all that gets back to the quality of design. I mean, to me, I'm much more focused on quality than quantity. We certainly want to have students have as many experiences as possible, but if they're not good, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, Andrew, I appreciate your time today. Thanks for your thoughts. And thanks for coming in from the Netherlands as well. I should tell everybody, Andrew's on his own study abroad practically.
My pleasure, Ian. Thank you.
Brenda, we're going to let you have the final word here today. Any final thoughts on this idea of what you would emphasize when it comes to making sure the experience is really beneficial for students? What makes the qualities that kind of make it stand out?
Because ours is specifically second-year students, and really developing career awareness, career readiness. My SYE coaches work with those students to identify what are their interests. So if they can share what they would be interested in, and then trying to find opportunities that match that. Because we have so many students who say, oh, I want to major in something, but don't know a professional who does that, have never been exposed to anyone or never talked to anyone. But if we know what their interests are, then finding those opportunities and matching those opportunities with the interests. And we've had no problem finding great opportunities for our students.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Brenda. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
I really appreciate everyone's time today. And just to close out here with a few reminders for the audience as we finish up. We're just going to be sending all of you an email with a link to the recording as well as the resources we shared in the chat today. feel free to share that email with colleagues if you think it would be of valuable information. I want to thank Brock Read of the Chronicle and Raj Echambadi of Illinois Tech for their contributions to the discussion. And thanks again to Illinois Tech for supporting this conversation. I also want to thank my colleague, Luna Liberty, for making sure everything ran smoothly behind the scenes. And of course, I want to thank all of you out there in our audience, without which we can't do our work at the Chronicle. So thank you very much for joining today. And I know we had a ton of questions in the Q&A, and I'm sorry we did not get all to the questions or comments that were posted there. I just want to make sure you know that we do read all of them, and I do inform our coverage of topics like this, and I do share them with some folks who cover teaching here at the Chronicle, and that's folks like Beth McMurtry and Becky Supiano, who write our teaching newsletter, a weekly newsletter about teaching, which I hope you'll sign up for if you see at chronicle.com. But all to say, the questions and comments are really valuable. Really appreciate that feedback for today's session as well, so thank you for that. For the Chronicle, I'm Ian Wilhelm. Stay well, everybody.